Hey everyone, happy Tag Tuesday. I am here for the Hindsight is 2020 reader tag, which was created by Erin Go Read. I will leave a link to her video, and I was tagged by Tom over at LA Books, or Tom LA Books, and I'll leave a link to his video as well. He's a great channel. I definitely recommend you go look for his videos. He's doing a series about Dante's Divine Comedy, which is really, really good, although I have shamefully fallen behind on watching the videos, but it's a great series, and he's a great booktuber, so I recommend him. But yeah, this seemed like a really kind of appropriate tag for me to do at this particular time because my birthday was like a week ago, and this tag is all about sort of looking back on your reading up to this point in your life, so it seems like appropriate to do it now. So anyway, the first question is, what were you like as an early and learning reader? I was not much of a reader as a kid. I was not someone who identified as a reader. I was not always reading a book. I was not one who most people would call a bookworm by any means. I had friends who were bookworms, but I was not a bookworm. I was more into sort of computer games, fantasizing. I watched movies, sort of. It's hard to pin down what I was into because I was into a lot of different things that I didn't go that deeply into as a kid, but I was not that into reading as a kid. I honestly felt like they were just too long. Like, I didn't have the willpower to get through books. You know, I would go to a book and the pages would go by so slowly. You know, I would start at the top and, you know, it would feel like 10 minutes had passed and I would only be halfway down the page. And, you know, and there were 500 of these pages, and so I just didn't have the patience for reading as a kid, unfortunately. But that's not to say that I didn't read at all. I did read some, and what I did read I really cherished. And what I did read tended to be things that you didn't actually have to read, like front to back. So I actually read a lot of sort of encyclopedias, or just sort of those kinds of books that you can just kind of graze through. So there was dinosaur books. I really love those sort of big dinosaur books with illustrations and a little entry about each dinosaur in them. I loved those. I, you know, would spend hours looking through those. History books of a similar nature that were for like kids or middle school aged people. There was one encyclopedia of world religions that I was really fascinated by, that I was so attached to for a long time. Dare I say it was my Bible. And I did have a habit of kind of just rereading the same entries over and over again. I don't think any of the encyclopedias I was into I read from cover to cover, even just with how much I looked into them. But anyway, so yeah, I really liked learning, certainly. And then there was some fiction that I liked. But what fiction that I read tended to be short books, tended to be very fast-paced, things that you don't need to think too much about, pretty, you know, cut and dry, bread and butter storytelling, and yeah, I'll get to what those are in actually the very next question. So the second question is, what book or book series really got you excited about reading as a kid? And when I was a kid, I would say the two series that I usually name are the Warriors series by Aaron Hunter, which is, you know, a sort of middle grade fantasy series about wildcats, which might explain a lot about me now. And then there's the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series by Catherine Lasky, which is sort of a similar idea. It's a middle grade fantasy series about owls who like have their own civilization and, you know, have battles with each other and fight evil and whatnot. Yeah, they're fun. I'm actually trying to reread at least part of both series this year. But I gobbled up so many of the books from these two series. And then the other book that I would say really actually properly transformed me into a reader. I didn't become a reader till I was about 21, and I'll get to that in a minute. But a book that always comes up in turning me into the reader that I am now is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. So I read this when I was 21 years old, and I think what Cloud Atlas really did for me is I think it really boosted my confidence as a reader, because like I said, I had trouble with like willpower and getting through books, which again isn't to say that I didn't read books, wasn't able to get through books, but, you know, in order for me to get through a book, I really, really had to be gripped by it. You know, paradoxically, because I had such a desire to just get from the beginning to the end of the book right away, that means that the books that I did get into, I tended to binge read a lot. But anyway, back to Cloud Atlas. what this book did for me is that it boosted my confidence that I could read through thick books, because Cloud Atlas is a long book, and it's not really an easy book either. It's not super dense. It's not, James versus Ulysses or something like this, but it is not really a straightforward, easy read, exactly. And the way that I got through it was because I had kind of an extra kick in the butt for it. So, I was in college at the time, and an old high school friend was going to come and visit me on a certain date, and one of his favorite movies ever was Cloud Atlas, the film adaptation of Cloud Atlas. And I told him that we would watch it together, but I also told him that I wanted to read the book before I watched the movie. So I said to myself, all right, I'll read the book by the time he visits, and I had, a few weeks. So I just divided Cloud Atlas up into a certain number of pages per day that I had to read it by the time he got home. And, I think it was something like 15 pages a day I had to read. And so I ended up getting through it just by reading, 15 pages a day. And that just sort of opened up the fact that, I didn't need to get straight from the beginning of a book to straight to the end of a book. I could just read little chunks of it per day, work on it incrementally, and then get to the end. And that's still how I read to this day. I divide books into chunks. I say, well, it's a 100-page book, I'll read 20 pages a day, get it done in 5 days, That is still how I read, and it varies depending on what kind of book it is and how long it is and so on and so forth. But that's still how I read. So, and it was just a great, great book, It really inspired me in that way too. It just, opened up how great literature can be, consuming it, as a lay reader, so to speak, as someone who's not having to read books for school. Number 3, has there been a person in your life, real or fictional, who inspired you to be a reader? I can't think of a fictional person who's inspired me to be a reader, but certainly there are 3 different people who I would name as inspirations for me as a reader. 3 real people. The first person I would name is my mom, who is a big reader herself, and who always kind of tried to get me to be a reader. She tried to nudge me in the direction of being a reader, because obviously she loved reading, and she sort of taught me that reading was enriching, that it was good for you, that it was fun, and that's why she tried to get me to do it. And so I grew up with this idea that reading was like a good thing. It was good for you, and that really stuck with me. So when I read Cloud Atlas and finally realized that I could be a reader, that was great for me, because suddenly I realized that I could be a reader, and I could do this thing that was really good and enriching and so on and so forth. So she gave a lot of positive reinforcement, although its fruits didn't blossom until very late after I was really sort of under her supervision, I suppose. But yeah, definitely my mom. And then her father, my maternal grandfather, Grandpa Al, my late grandpa, he was an inspiration as well. He was actually a literature professor. He specialized in 20th century English, Irish, and American drama. Samuel Beckett was a big author for him, and obviously Samuel Beckett's a big author for me, but George Bernard Shaw was his big person, but Harold Pinter was another one. But anyway, he didn't push me to read anything in particular, but he really kind of inspired me to read more classics. He would talk with me about classics, the classics that I had read. He would give me recommendations of books to read, and he was just again a positive presence. And he wasn't trying to push me into reading certain kinds of books. He was just happy to talk with me about books, and he always talked so intelligently and eloquently that it kind of was, again, positive reinforcement to keep reading. And then the third person I want to talk about is my favorite teacher ever, from high school at least, and that is Miss Levy. I had her for honors American history and AP English literature in my junior and senior years of high school, and she was just a great teacher. Again, really passionate about literature. I think one really long-term effect that she had on the way that I read is that she is why I'm kind of a slow and deliberate reader, and a relatively, I like to think a relatively deep reader, because to succeed in her classes, you had to read slowly and closely and carefully, because she gave quizzes on the readings. You would read a couple of chapters per night, and you would be quizzed on it the next day. And she wouldn't exactly ask questions like, what was the color pants of this one character who appears in this one scene and then never appears again. but she would ask questions, you know, that were difficult. You know, you had to really be paying close attention to know them. You know, there was one question I remember on one quiz where only I and one other student got it correct. Yeah, so they were tough quizzes. And then we had to obviously write essays for the classes as well, and we had to do them without the book near us. Yeah, so she really instilled this idea of being a close and deliberate reader and trying to really remember what you read and look for resonances. But in addition, she was just a great influence on me intellectually. She, I think, is the reason I'm as good a writer as I am. Yeah, so I had to give a shout out to her, and if I could talk to her now, I know we would talk about books, you know, till the sunset. So, yeah. And question 4 is, at what point did you begin to identify as a reader? Well, I sort of already touched on this when I was around 21 after I read Cloud Atlas, but there was a lot else going on that I think helped to turn me into a reader around that time in my life. I took a history of psychology class around that time, and when you learn about the history of psychology, you learn a lot about philosophy, because for much of its deep past, psychology was just a subfield of philosophy. You know, epistemology was the technical term. And so we learned about, you know, David Hume, Rene Descartes, Immanuel Kant, these philosophers, and this, because of my interest in psychology, since I still obviously study psychology, this got me interested in reading those texts that were important in the history of psychology. So I read, like, you know, The Discourse on Method by Rene Descartes and Plato's Republic, and then as I learned more about philosophy, I wanted to read other texts of philosophy that weren't necessarily that important to the history of psychology. So I read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius and Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, and these texts also played a part in the same thing as Cloud Atlas did, in boosting my confidence as a reader, because, you know, these were dense texts, right? They weren't necessarily that long. You know, the Meditations is only like 120 pages, Thus Spoke Zarathustra is just under 300 pages, you know, but they were dense, you know, and again, I had to divide them up well so that I could digest a chunk every day, and so they boosted my confidence in that sense, but they also, you know, sent me to other books. You know, whenever you read a book of philosophy, you find out that there was this other book of philosophy that was in conversation with it, or that it was responding to, and so it got me, you know, sort of exploring the wider philosophical literature, so to speak, and so it got me sort of gathering a TBR for the first time in my life, you know? So that was big as well, and then I think the Cloud Atlas thing was kind of the last straw, you know, the tipping point, where I finally just said, okay, this reading thing is awesome, so I will just go ahead and do it. And then I just remember this amazing summer. It was around the spring, when I was 21, that I really turned into a reader when I read Cloud Atlas. And that summer, I just read so much that summer, and it was wonderful. And then number 5 is kind of a doozy. So number 5 is, how has being a reader shaped your life and worldview? I think that if I didn't read, my experience of this world would be a lot shallower than it is. I think I would marvel less at this world and all of its complexity and beauty and horror if I wasn't able to absorb a huge amount of the world through reading, because I think we read because we can never have enough experiences, because we can never travel everywhere, because we can never meet everyone, because we can never do everything. We do it vicariously through reading, and we learn so much while reading, and that enriches our interactions with this world, I think. And I almost see reading as sort of an act of worship, which I don't mean to say that, you know, the world is wonderful and everything is great. Obviously, there's a lot that's profoundly wrong with this world, but I don't think that the word worship only has to be, you know, love and praise. It also has a feeling of sort of awe, which comes with it a sense of dread. But I feel like my reading and learning about the world is sort of an act of worship of the world, and a way of sort of praising it in all of its sort of mutilated glory, I guess. And again, I don't mean praise in the sense that I think the world is wonderful. I mean it sort of more in the sense of the great Adam Zagajewski poem, Try to Praise the Mutilated World, which is such a great poem, and if you haven't read it, I think you should, but I mean praise sort of in that sense. And learning about it and reading about it is a way that I find to do that. Yeah, I think it just helps me to look on this world with wonder. So I hope that all made sense and didn't sound too pompous, but anyway, that's my answer. And then the last prompt here is just to tag someone who's reading history you want to learn more about. I'm going to tag a booktuber slash film tuber who's relatively new to me. Her name is Marianne Guevara, and she is a booktuber and a film tuber. She talks about books. She does really great book and film pairing videos, and so yeah, I would like to learn more about your history, Marianne. So if you want to do the tag, go ahead and do it. No pressure though. But anyway, and I also heartily recommend that you go check out Marianne's channel because it's wonderful. So anyway, that is the Hindsight is 2020 reader tag. Let me know if you have any thoughts, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye.